Welcome to the webinar, everyone. This is the Fresh Start Effect, Proven Strategies to Kickstart Your Enrollment in the New Year, presented by HEM Higher Education Marketing. So let me just get this going over here. So before we get into the content, just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody who hasn't been to one of these webinars before. So you should be able to have access to both a chat and a questions function. If you add anything in the questions, we'll get sort of a list of those and we can go over that at the very end of this webinar. And the chat, it could be just any sort of comments along the way. We should have somebody on our team who's able to monitor those for you. So feel free to use whichever one you want. Also, this session is being recorded, so the slides and the recording will be sent to you within 1 business day. So hopefully just before the start of the weekend over here. So in your presentation today, there'll be 2 of us who will be talking. There's myself, Alexander Nahai. I'm the Director of Paid Ads and Analytics here at Higher Education Marketing, and I'm joined by my colleague Valentin, who's the manager of the inbound marketing team over here.
Hi, everyone.
So on our agenda today, we've got a couple sections to our webinar. The first is going to be just talking about this fresh start effect, why it's important, why we should capitalize on this for digital marketing. We're going to talk about how you should plan your own fresh start effect campaign. And in particular, Valentin is going to start going into a bit more details on types of material you can craft for inbound marketing, some ideas that maybe your school will find useful there as well. And then I'm going to come back, talk a bit about paid advertising, how to plan it, how it might fit in with your overall initiatives. And then we'll just end with a bit of takeaways, conclusions, and whatever time we have left for questions at the end. So before we get, I guess, into the meat of things, we had a quick poll we wanted to go over with you guys. So I'm just going to open it over here. So it's basically, when the winter holidays, New Year's come around, how does it impact your advertising? In terms of maybe budgets or efforts, do you increase them during this end of year time? Do you decrease them? Does it stay about the same? You're not too sure. So if you feel like answering the poll, by all means, just pick on one of those and probably another like 10, 15 seconds, I'll share the results with everybody, see where things sit. Okay, we got a few more coming in. One more time, last chance, and I'm going to close the poll right about now. And let's take a look at our results. So based on people surveyed, we have very few that look towards actually increasing, a lot that decrease, stays the same, or unsure. So that's actually interesting, very different from the results we had in this morning's version of the webinar, where we had, I think, half was increase and half was the same. So I guess one of the things that you'll be hearing us about is probably why we think this is a good time to actually increase, to do a little extra, or at the very least, stay the same and don't shut off over the holiday season because you might be missing out on some pretty strong opportunities. So understanding the fresh start effect. So this term fresh start was actually one of my colleagues who first started using that. I think before in-house, we're just talking about, new year or new you or back to school and terms like that. But fresh start is actually this sort of concept that's been spoken about in some of the psychological journals or marketing journals where people talk about psychology. And it's sort of a perceivable effect that at the end of the year and into the new year, people start thinking about their future, thinking about what they want to do next, and really just have this idea that they want to have some sort of a fresh start. So I'll talk a bit about those statistics just on the next slide, but the reason I wanted to just linger here for a second is that it might be a bit relevant to what some of you answered on the poll. So I'd say probably like 4 or 5 years ago, when we talked to a lot of schools about what they're planning to do for the holidays and the new year, a lot of them actually kind of just shut down entirely from, December until maybe second, even third week of January, pretty much just went on vacation, closed up shop and so forth. And so I think a lot of that was based on sort of like an older, mentality, maybe just not necessarily based on data, but kind of just based on the feeling that, people are just not going to be around. They're going to be checked out. The holidays are off season for education. So there's really no point in advertising here, unless maybe you're into e-commerce or you're selling things. Because obviously, end of the year, there's like Black Friday in the States, and we also have like Boxing Day, Christmas, all these things going on at once. Was it really like, a hot ticket time for education? I mean, traditionally, didn't really think so, but what we started noticing about 4 years ago is that any advertiser that we were working with where we stayed on, in fact, pushed a little bit more, we had pretty surprising results, notably that A lot of competitors were actually shut off, but there were still people not only searching for courses and education, but there was actually an increase of it, particularly in the later half of December and into January. And so anybody that was around during this time was actually there pretty much, scooping up tons of inquiries and leads that other people were kind of missing out on. So a lot of the reasons that a lot of people we talked to at schools are giving themselves didn't actually turn out to be true. Particularly, if your competitors are closed, what have you got to lose? Why bother? But actually, if a lot of your competitors are closed and there's a lot of people searching, this is pretty much the perfect time to be advertising. And so the fresh start effect, as some other marketers have pointed out, is in fact real. And it doesn't just apply to, gym memberships and things like that. I mean, like how many people in December promised themselves they'd start going to the gym in January, bought that membership, maybe you stuck around with it all year. That's actually pretty amazing if you did. But, a lot of people have this mentality. They need to start something new. It's the new year, next year, 2024, 2025, whatever. We're going to really like change, take the next steps. And so we actually see this taking place also in education. So in particular, by the time January rolls around, people have probably spent a few weeks in December already thinking about things like career changes or upskilling or ways to advance in their own career or new training or even just going back to school. So particularly like these people start taking actions not necessarily before New Year's, but right after New Year's in those first few weeks of January. Sometimes this effect keeps going into February, almost all the way up to March. And so we've seen this in data. This is a real thing, that depending on where you're located, probably we've seen it more so in Canada, States than Europe, just because we have a larger data pool there. But in some places, searches for people wanting to go back to school, all kinds of training, things like that, surge between 50 to 150% during this time. So that's a significant increase from, like a day-to-day basis going on right here. And the other thing that's interesting is that this effect seems to be cyclical. We've seen it for the past couple of years that latter half of December, sometimes even earlier in December, these searches start picking up. People are really looking for it, whether it's on Google or social media, and then really, taking those first steps to join top of the funnels for a lot of your admissions processes in January. And so knowing this is cyclical, one of the advantages is if you plan something this year around, you could probably adapt it for future years and just have this as part of your recurring marketing cycle. So instead of, staying static all the way year round, you might want to have some of these peaks. So I know a few months ago, if you've been here for some of the webinars, we talked about back to school, something that happens, in the later part of summer into autumn. So this is kind of a similar mentality to that, except it looks like in some ways this could sometimes, or in often cases, I should say, be even more of a surge than the end of summer one. So some of the reasons why you should want to consider adding this on. I mean, one, these campaigns really focus on goals. So they really address pain points and desires of your students. So particularly if people have goals for the new year, you're really kind of touching base with what they're already thinking. It's psychologically effective. I mean, we're capitalizing on this effect that we know exists. We've seen it in the data and in studies. But also this type of campaign, this type of materials you put together could actually be supportive of your other efforts. So if you have a lot of evergreen strategies, ones that stay up all year round, what you'll be putting together for this fresh start won't necessarily be the same. So fresh start campaigns can be targeting the same people we normally do, but we find a lot with the data, we've seen that these are actually just different people doing different searches, have different behaviors, different interests. They still want to go back to school, but they're not going to be the exact same cohort as they normally are. So if you have these separate campaigns, you can kind of collect these leads, these prospects as well. So how do you get around to planning a fresh start campaign? So usually when we approach things like this, we see it in the two main phases. So one would be your phase where you start building and prepping your assets. And then two would be the live phase where you actually roll out your campaign, some of your direct advertising, budget spends, and so forth. So the prep phase, I mean, depending on the size of your team and your resources, you'd probably want to at least, put 2 to 4 weeks into just putting things together to make sure you have a good campaign that's ready. So that's one reason why we're talking about this, in October, because ideally November is when you want to decide that you're going to do something like this and already have the machine, churning out all your resources that you need for coming ahead. And so during this first phase, before you actually launch it, you're pretty much going to want to make sure all of your inbound marketing materials, as well as your paid assets are set and ready to go. They don't all need to be live, but at least if you have it prepared, you can have a better control when it's actually during the live phase. And so in the live phase, we usually refer to this as sort of a push campaign. So a campaign that might have two phases in it. Usually this really applies directly to paid advertising, but other assets as well. And so what we see a lot, what we've seen, I guess, the past 2 years, I should be more specific for the Fresh Start campaigns, is that one in December, like I said, people are is when they're starting to think about going back to school, think about changing their careers, think about advancing in the careers and getting new certifications and qualifications. So this time in December, we would strongly recommend using this to build awareness. So that's not to say you're not looking for prospects, but it might not need to be the main focus of what you're doing because a lot of people in this cohort are thinking about it, but maybe haven't completely decided which school or which certification that they want yet. But it's something they're starting to Google search or even check for on TikTok and whatnot. So you should probably consider having a branded phase right here. You definitely want all of your inbound assets to be live, like some of the ones that Valentin will talk about. You get some ideas for those. You get those live and in place. And for your paid ad campaigns, you can focus on things like traffic, awareness, branding, just so that when they're thinking about these, whether they're on social media or in Google, they'll start, bumping into your brand, getting those first touch points with your offerings. And that'll be sort of the thing that plants the seed when we try to remarket to them later. So if you have the resources, we think it's worth doing this throughout December, but the last 2 weeks in December are the more pivotal ones. That's when we really start to see things grow quite a bit. The first 2 weeks, we actually see sometimes it's a bit lower. It could be because also maybe current students are taking exams, other people are ramping up their own sort of holiday work schedules and all that. But as soon as you get to that midway point, you really want to have this up and live. And then sort of where everything comes together would be the second stage, so the driving action stage, which usually you want minimum of 2 weeks in the first 2 weeks of January, but ideally the whole month. And this is where you go a lot heavier on your traditional lead gen as well as remarketing. So all the people that visited all your assets earlier, all the ones that, read your blogs, that saw your fresh start content, went through your traffic campaigns. If you have this all targeted well and your pixels are in place, you can just remarket them relatively on the cheap too and get some good results that way. So usually when you have these campaigns running, your first month, you might not see a lot of leads, a lot of, inquiries coming in, but the second is phases where it really pays off. And so one note here, I said probably all of January is when you'd want to be aiming for the second phase. But realistically, if you're getting good results and have good momentum, don't just arbitrarily stop your campaigns. So if you have this good remarketing in place and you're still getting tons of leads at the end of January, keep it going until it trickles off. So there's no reason just to cut off the flow if things are going well. We've had some schools that went pretty much all the way to March, and they were still getting benefits out of that. But, by March and spring, it's no longer really the new year, but, keep the momentum going as long as you can, get the most out of this, and then, bring these lessons again next year if you do the same thing over again. So also just a note about how you can sort of interact with this cohort and some of the differences. I guess it relates to how we want to get together with the messaging here. So Fresh Start, what we've seen when people are doing these searches is that it's not often as program specific as maybe some of your other lead capturing funnels might be. So a lot of evergreen campaigns you have up all year round are for specific certifications or programs or courses. That's usually the way we do it. But a lot of this fresh start people, they're a bit more general. So they know they want to go back to school, but there's a large chunk of them that don't necessarily know what they want to take. So you're going to see, if you look at like even search terms in Google, a lot of things like, colleges near me, college programs, some maybe even like healthcare programs, but they don't really know the program name. There'll be a lot of stuff like that going on, or should I study? How do I advance in this? So things like that, you're going to see a lot of it. So usually that when people are doing these types of searches, it means they might be a little bit less qualified initially. They're not as sure how it's going to go. So what you really want to do is steer your messaging towards your specific offering. So if somebody lands on your blog post talking about this, you're really going to address their pain points and offer solutions based on your own offering. So these people that are in this mode are often the ones who feel a little stuck. They want something new. They need to advance, just better opportunities in general. And so solutions, if you're talking about how your program can lead to career changes, advancement opportunities, you can start right away, take the first steps, next week in January. These are things that are probably really going to resonate with this cohort of people. So that's just something to keep in mind when we talk about more assets, that you might want to have a little bit more of a focused catch that then pushes towards how your actual programs fit these goals. So prepping and promoting. So I'm going to talk about, I think, yes, I have one or two slides here before I hand it over to Valentin. But one thing, and we've said this before in some of our past webinars, so sorry if you've heard something similar, but it's just as relevant here as it is elsewhere. Anytime you do a campaign, you ideally want to have a lead magnet in place. So what's a lead magnet? Lead magnet is something that you offer prospects, prospective students. That's more than just, fill in the form, thanks, bye-bye. You want to give them something that's sort of tangible, that's relevant, that supports your brand, that can really give them one reason, like extra nudge to fill in that form. So like, what does your offering have that stands out from all the other schools that are also just, basically hoping that they give a contact to your admissions team? So in cases like this, particularly for like a fresh start, program brochures are good all the time. It gives a lot of information. It's something tangible. They can read at their own leisure, answer questions. In this case, you might want to tweak them slightly if you already have them. Maybe focus a bit more on career outcomes, success rates, the career services your school offers. Again, things that really kind of relate to these goals and ambitions that people seem to really have top of the mind during this time. Things like your faculty credentials and your campus are good, but again, try to think of these pain points they have. They really want to change. They really want to, take the next steps this year. So what can your offerings do to help them get there? And of course, there's lots of other options that we've spoken about on past webinars. So I won't get into them too deep here. But open houses are great. Everybody loves a free lunch, financial support. A lot of places, maybe like local governments or boards offer funding and bursaries, things like that. You really want to give them as much support as you can and really convince them that your offerings are the ones that are going to get them where they need to be going. Oh, and I guess I probably should put this slide beforehand, but these are just attributes of what would be ideal for your lead magnet, So, this needs to provide value, but the ones I want to point out probably the most would be it solves these problems, addresses these pain points, so we know what their pain points are. How can you resolve those with your content? But also immediate delivery is really important because if somebody fills in that form, you want them to get the download right away, get the email right away. Because if it takes 2 or 3 days for this to show up, there's a good chance they're going to keep browsing and they might stumble upon a competitor's website. They get it immediately and that starts addressing all of their pain points. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Valentin for a little bit, who's going to start talking about specific examples of content and inbound marketing strategies that could be really effective during this campaign.
Thank you.
So it's all yours.
So yes, I'm going to present you different ways to reach your audience and taking advantage of the New Year's fresh start effect. So the first thing to consider when it comes to promoting your programs and reach out to your audience is to take advantage of the blog post. The blog posts are a great way to reach and motivate your target audience in an informal way. And if they are SEO optimized, it's also even better because you're going to be able to be visible on search engine. So, for example, here on the right side, we have a college that is based in Ontario. This school decided to really highlight the benefits of starting a program in January. They have on their welcome page a call to action to learn more about the benefits of starting a program in January. And then they have a full page dedicated to starting in January with different type of content. So there are very different options here. And the idea is to, again, make sure you answer the concern of your persona, their motivation, and also inspire them. So that's why we have an example here of a school that is presenting their current students, their story, and also what are the benefits of starting a program in January. And there are very different options here, and the more you're going to be able to find answer to the questions your potential student may have, the better you're going to get chance to get leads and contact information. The blog posts they have to be very SEO optimized with the focus keyword, the SEO title, the blog title, the secondary keywords, the call to actions, structured data, and also, if possible, FAQ to answer their concern. We have some example here on the slide of type of blog post, very general overall, but that can be adapted to any type of schools. And again, the idea here, it's more to motivate, inspire, and give answers. So on the next slide, we have another very trendy trend for when it comes to promote program. It's the media content sponsored. We see that a lot of schools are taking advantage of online media, which is either local or more national. Sponsored content are a great way to reach a wider audience. They are also a great way to build credibility, trust, and brand awareness, thought leadership as well. And it's also a great opportunity to get access to data and analytics from an external media. So here we have an example on the right side again of a school that decided to really create a unique content that is visible in a local media in the US. And the media sponsored content look like it's an article because it's usually placed in different areas where people can click easily around all the real current news. So this is a good option to take advantage of the New Year fresh start effect. On the next slide, so social media is always essential. Social media with a very good organic time-based social media campaign. It's a good opportunity again to reach out to your audience, to educate your audience, to motivate your audience, and inspire your prospective students. We have here some example of clear messages from different schools that are really focused on new year, new careers, a fresh start. There are a lot of different options when it comes to share content on social media. It could be if ever you have exclusive offers, testimonials as well from your current students, polls again if you want to interact with your potential students, informative infographics as well if ever you want to again share tips and share answer to any potential concern in a more user-friendly or user easy way to read information. On the next slide, we have a slide only dedicated to short videos, because what we see is that schools are taking advantage more and more of short videos because they are the most trendy content available on social media. They are very, they get overall, from what we see with all our clients, the best results. And with short videos, you have a great opportunity to show your campus, to show your students, to show them in action. And it's, again, a great opportunity for your potential student to project themselves as an eventual student of your school. And here we have 3 examples of schools that use the New Year's vibe, fresh start effect with their student in action. So maybe we can play them. I don't think you can hear the sound, but when we're going to send you the presentation, you'll have access to the sound and hear what they say. But the idea here, again, it's to inspire, motivate, give also share testimonials from the student in a more fun way to watch. And yeah. On the last video also, we see that the school decided to use the holiday season vibe to show their campus, and with very specific messages dedicated to starting a new program, taking advantage of getting back to school in the new year. On the next slide, we have the newsletter and email campaign. Also, it's a great option to reach your audience. Once you collect leads from paid ads, you can send them very targeted messages through newsletter or email, and it can provide you a direct line of communication with your leads. You can create also very personalized emails to resonate better with your audience. You get also to tracking and analytics, of course, to monitor your performance. If you use any AI tools, you can save time also reaching your audience, and then you can generate traffic to your website as well. So newsletter and emails are essential, and schools are using it a lot to share messages about the New Year's vibe, the fresh start effect. And what we see also is that with the messages, what we do for our clients and what is very trendy is to include visual in your newsletter and emails. Visual are more fun to read and to look at, and it's something that is very trendy. So we highly recommend to use this type of content in your newsletter and emails. Webinar, again, we see schools often use webinar to communicate with their potential students. The webinar can be, of course, about your schools and specific programs that you offer, but you can also have webinars to share your personal expertise and your tips on how to returning back to school, how to also answer again all the concern your potential student may have. So the webinars can be promoted on your social media, email marketing. They can be promoted in the educational forums and groups, newsletter, website page, and blog posts. And it's a great way also to have a first real interaction with your potential student, because they can also ask questions and you can reply to them directly on this type of format. Another thing that we see is that quizzes are very trendy when it comes to New Year's and new careers. A lot of schools are using quiz, and that they include it either on their website, but also they share it on social media, or sometimes in very local news media. We see sometimes some quiz, New Year, new career. What is the job that could be great for you for the New Year's? Quiz enhance student interest and engagement, creating and more interactive and fun for the enrollment process. And they can be very effective for lead generation if you add a call to action to request their contact information.
All right, thanks, Valentin. So I guess before we get to paid advertising, I just wanted to elaborate even on one thing that Valentin mentioned also about how AI could also potentially help you, when you're rolling out these materials. So, I mean, some of the most common AI tools these days are like the large language models such as ChatGPT. So if you find yourself in, maybe a smaller team with limited resources, using ChatGPT, you can actually use it, say you have your blog post, you can use it to create a snippet for it or a newsletter blurb or a smaller piece. These tools are really good for kind of summarizing and shrinking to different formats. So if you have one solid piece and you really don't have, the team that could polish it perfectly, AI could be a good help to at least, get it to a bit more formats and things like that. So in the last portion of the webinar here, I'm just going to dive into some general tips and things for paid advertising. So when I say paid advertising or paid ads, it's anything that has, direct ad spend budget. So for instance, while creating blogs might be part of your budget, it doesn't have a dedicated ad spend to drive traffic. It does so organically. And so paid advertising is probably really key during this point, because one, if there's a large surge of volume. Paid advertising is one way that you pretty much guarantee these clicks, visitors on your site, people that get to your landing pages, get to your material, so forth. It's really one of the most efficient ways of driving traffic to where you need it, especially if you have an RFI form ready and waiting to start collecting some leads. So when you start doing your paid advertising, when you put it together, some things you're going to want to do is that, so even let's say you drafted all your campaigns, you're really going to want to double check this with some of your other resources. So notably, if you have evergreen campaigns, if you're advertising all year round, you're probably going to want to make sure that your fresh start ones don't completely overlap in terms of audiences and keywords. I mean, realistically, if you're doing your keyword research, you're probably going to be using a bit more general keywords now. It's not to say you shouldn't use very specific ones for your programs, but if you already have program specific campaigns going and audiences, some of these more general ones will probably be what helps you really scoop up a lot of this additional traffic that's going around out there. And plus, if it's slightly different, it won't be self-competing and, with your existing ads anywhere else. You're also going to make sure that all of your assets, so if you create blogs and other things, landing pages, wherever you send traffic to during this time, you're going to make sure it's all tagged correctly with, your meta pixels, your Google remarketing tags, and so forth. Otherwise, when it comes time to remarket, you won't have a very large audience pool available. So just double check all of that, in the early stages before you've actually gone live. And same with your LPs, this is probably common refrain of mine, but every time you have an LP and RFI form, test it, test it, test it. Make sure that it shows up in your CRM. Make sure it shows up with the correct parameters. A lot of people, we suggest for their New Year's campaign that have a different tag for these people so you can see them differently. So maybe it could give your sales team or your admin team a heads up that this is from the New Year's crowd, so they might need a little bit more working. So things like this, you want to make sure this is all in place before you go live, because there's nothing worse than having a landing page. You see 5 leads in your dashboard, but they're not there in your CRM. And similarly, also, if you're using instant forms on Meta or other social media, so you want to double check these beforehand. In the case of Meta, if it's not connected properly, you can still download them from Meta's Leads Manager. But if you want to ask different questions, things that help identify them, you might want to just, again, double check all this beforehand. So when you're putting together your campaigns for the fresh start, as we talked about earlier, there'd be sort of 2 parts to it, maybe the December part, January part. In December, you'll probably be served best by using, say, like traffic campaigns on, social media versus, that's not to say shut off all your conversion ones, but traffic ones are really good at driving lots of volume to certain pages that might be slightly less qualified overall. They're not the ones that are there ready to register, but at least we know they're thinking about this. So if you get them on the cheap to your page, they can get more of that information, see how your programs connect with the goals, so forth. So even if they don't sign up that day or make that first step that day, at least it's already been planted, because then you can start remarketing them to them afterwards. So on social media, you're probably really going to want to use this traffic strategy first. I wouldn't recommend putting most of your budget there. At least put a portion of it, maybe, a third of it, and the other 2/3 on your remarketing and prospecting efforts afterwards. And similarly, if using Google's sort of search and discovery advertising, we've noticed in the past 2 years using discovery campaigns can be really effective here. That's one of Google's, mixed media. So it has a bit of an AI inside where it looks at people based on signals and recent browsing history to serve them your ads. Most of it's visual. Although now I think it's actually this month is changing to a newer campaign type called Demand Gen that also has a video component. But this type of campaign is actually really good for people that have been, searching for fresh start type things on the web, but maybe not at that moment, and then serves them the ad. So they're in the mentality and then it drives them to where they need to go. So those can be really good at this time. But of course, search on Google is really its bread and butter. There's a lot of search terms you're going to want to be considering. Again, as you talk about a bit more general, it's not to say don't use any specifics, but general, at least that you help catch some more of this bubble that's going on here. And so with your landing pages and all this, so kind of like we mentioned earlier, you want to make sure these are fairly goal focused. So it's good to have a lot of information with your school, your campus and all that, but really make sure these key messaging points are in there, how this helps them meet their goals. Just never be afraid to, tweak landing pages a little bit for specific campaigns. Maybe you have a page that works amazing for others. take that same design, just reword it, make sure the highlights are what they need to see at this time, and then use that. You don't need to, reinvent the wheel here. If you have a well-optimized landing page, just tweak it for this to get even slightly better results. If you don't, if you're kind of starting from scratch, probably the number one thing to recommend is always make sure these are mobile optimized, because every now and then we still work with a school that's using some archaic landing page software that thinks everybody still uses their desktop, as opposed to most people who are in fact on their mobile phones these days. And if you're building one from scratch, again, test, test, test. The last thing you want is that it looks great, but it just doesn't function. And so on social media, particularly for the remarketing phase, we really recommend you use the instant forms or lead forms inside the app. So there's a few caveats with these. Lead forms are very easy to fill in, which is amazing. So if somebody's already engaged with your content and they're kind of just there scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, it's really easy for them to fill it in. But we do hear a lot of similar complaints from schools about what their leads are like on Meta and Instagram, that they're often more fickle, they're harder to reach. There's some people that don't remember filling in the form. A lot of weird things like that happen, which is unfortunately part of the game when it comes to advertising on social media. So if you're a small team with, one person in the admissions office that can't handle a large volume to look through the diamonds in the rough, that's a little bit of, a caveat to consider. Realistically, we've seen that you get more leads overall from Facebook, from Meta, using lead forms and more quality leads than going to a landing page, especially considering all the tracking issues now with iPhones not being very compatible with Facebook and all that. And so we think it's good, but you have to be aware that you might need to find a way to sift through some of the junk that's inevitably going to get in there. You'll still get good results, but there's always going to be a bit more fluff on social media than what you're getting on Google, unfortunately. So a good strategy to also have a nurture campaign, maybe some email drips for these people, something to keep them engaged. You can even send them an email and say, don't worry, we're going to call you soon, because out of all the platforms, people on Instagram, when you try to call them, have like much lower success rates that we find than Google, or at least what we've heard from a lot of admissions teams. So things like that to consider. The other thing too is that if it's very valuable, you can also give them the offer to call your admissions team. Some of you might even have call centers that are ready and waiting. Otherwise, good old RFI form, request for information is probably exactly what you need. And so we're just starting to run to the edge of our time, which is great because we're pretty much at the end over here. So a couple of takeaways and some actual things for you guys to consider. One, like we talked about, fresh start campaigns capitalize on human psychology and the time of the year. So it's a really good opportunity to do this. We've seen it in the data. We've seen the results. We know what's going on. So by all means, if you have the additional marketing budget and drive and, resources, you should consider capitalizing on it this year. Don't wait forever. This doesn't last all the time. These marketing initiatives can run parallel to your existing strategies. So, the app, worst case scenario, you can just kind of crank up your existing strategies. They're going to get in more volume, most likely that last bit of December, early January than normal. So if you have the extra resources, just crank those up. But we've seen really good results if you have this sort of parallel strategy going on top. Just as I said, again, all these people that are sort of a different mentality than your usual prospects is one good way to connect with them. I guess word of warning though, so we talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of things you can do. If you're a small team, it's better to go small and focused than big and unfocused. You should, know what you can do, what you can put out. Don't feel like you need to get everything under the sun out there if you can't handle it and follow through with it. So do what you can within your means. Even if it's just, one Facebook post or two, but by all means, try to do something because there's definitely something to be gained from this. It also helps to have a robust follow-up process, as again, compared to maybe your usual cohorts of prospects, these ones might be a little bit less certain. They know that they want to do something, but you still might need, if you're talking to them on the phone, convince them a bit more, give them a bit more information, call to them a bit more, just really, because they're not going to be at the same point as somebody that goes in, does one Google search, fills in a form, and becomes your student. Like those people exist, but, these people clearly want to have their goals achieved, and you just have to help convince them that your school is going to be the one doing that. And lastly, at the end of this, be sure to measure your results and review, because if it turns out well, you can apply these strategies to next year, and this can become part of your sort of digital marketing, toolbox moving forward. So that wraps up the main part of our webinar. We're still going to do questions in a minute, but before we get there, we just want to remind everybody, HEM is a marketing agency. So if you need help with any sort of digital marketing and want help even your own Fresh Start campaign, we do have a landing page that's going to be accessible through this link when you get your version of the slides later. Also, if you like talking to people over the phone, we have two wonderful salespeople. We have Scott Cross and Mackenzie Zach for both in North America. So if their contact details will be here as well, you can shoot them an email if you have any questions, or feel free to reach out to them. And so we have a little bit of time left, and I see there's a couple of questions here. So I'm going to pop these open and see what we have. So one here is, can you give an example of discovery advertising? So in this case, when I was talking about discovery campaigns, I was specifically talking about a campaign type that's on Google. So it's kind of a weird time right now because there's some transitions. Discovery is becoming a new campaign type called demand gen. But discovery basically is mostly visual, but a bit of text that pops up on the discovery feed, particularly for mobile users on their Google accounts. So often when they're browsing news, it could pop up in there. And the way it works is that it's mostly based on personas. So Google has a lot of AI that works behind the scenes in its campaigns. So in this case, a lot of the AI really kind of picks up on signals and it tries to send your ads to people that it thinks are going to most likely, become a conversion. So fill in your form. So in that sense, it's one of the newer types of ad formats. You don't have as much control as you would, say, over search, but what we've seen is that these campaigns do work really well, especially during this time, because a lot of people, not necessarily doing the search at that moment, but they've been searching for it beforehand. So Google sort of signals the algorithm, the way it works, it kind of figures out who's most likely looking for your offerings, even if they maybe aren't necessarily, typing the name of your school in there at the moment. Another question about lengths of videos. So in most, I guess, advertising, shorter tends to be better for videos. If it's like a short video, I think Valentin, you're at what, like 60 seconds is the limit for like a short organic video. What would you say?
For organic videos, I would say the shorter the better as well, because we see that it's hard to get attention very long on social media. People tend to scroll very fast. So yeah, I would say a good time limit is 30 seconds, 20, 30 seconds. But if you go over, it's okay. But overall, if you have the most important part of your messages at the beginning, 20 seconds, I would say 20, 30.
Yeah, I'd say something similar too for paid advertising. So if we're using video as like a paid ad collateral instead of an image, in most cases, I think 15 seconds is the one that has generally works the best. We've had some weird cases and some data where a 30 or a 60-second worked better than a 15. We're not sure why, but they're really just outliers. In general, shorter is better. You want it to be really, to the point, clear, direct, and not have any slope times in it because, people's attention spans, I'm sure we all have them ourselves, where they're getting shorter. We don't want to see anything boring. So more exciting and the shorter, the better. And another question about uh, price per lead, I believe is what it's asking. So in this case, it really depends on where you're located, which platform you're using. Sort of the broad thing that we've seen is that when you're doing the remarketing effectively, often on social media, you'll see a lower cost than your average would be on the remarketing leads. So say your average is, $50 is what you run month to month. It'll probably be sometimes as low as half, sometimes around there, but you should be expecting to see it for less than what you normally would during this time. Probably not in December, because again, a lot of this is just going towards building audiences, but when that January boom comes around, you're going to tend to see what we've seen at least is fairly cheaper than average leads and more of them, especially since there's just so much more searches going on. Often you can capture quite a few with sort of easy wins in there. And one other question about advertising budgets for ad spend. So I mentioned kind of briefly that your ad spend, you might want to backload a lot of it to January. So say you have, $3,000 is your availability, maybe 1,000 in December and the other 2,000 in January, maybe like a 1/3, 2/3 approach is often what we see because you really don't want to run out of budget when you're remarketing and collecting leads. So you can kind of taper your traffic campaigns in the first part of that. And yeah, I guess in generally North America, we usually don't recommend spending less than $1,000 a month here. I mean, if you're a small school, 500 is doable, but when you go into numbers lower than that, it's really kind of hard to assess, what worked and what didn't, just because you don't have a ton of data. I mean, if you go smaller, I mean, you're able to manage it. That's great. But again, when you're looking at much smaller amounts, it's sometimes harder to optimize. It might be unclear, did this really succeed? Did it not succeed? It could have been some flukes and so forth. And so with that, we are actually completely out of time, so I'll stop blabbing right now. Um, yeah, so I guess glad you all dropped by. We'll be sending these slides to you hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. And without further ado, hope to catch you on the coming webinars we have every month. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.